Welcome to Australia. We are the lucky country, so let's keep it that way.
Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the senator, and he's going to be asking questions about this new hate speech law. So all of us in Australia can sort of understand the absurdity of it, how it makes no sense. Even the people that have supposedly drafting it can't even answer basic questions on how it's going to actually be applied across the whole country. So these new hate speech laws have been so vaguely drafted and explained and enforced on us 28 million people without any real clear explanation. There's been a 500-page bill, and that's been condensed into a 150-page technical memorandum. And how are we supposed to mentally remember every single page for a 500-page bill? And then when we look at some of our political members that we're going to watch sort of 5-7 minute video today. Sorry, I do freestyle these videos, so bear with me. If the senator who is questioning the person who's actually written the bill, how are we supposed to even know what to do to be able to recall these more than 500 pages of a bill that we're going to be held responsible for and possibly face 10 years imprisonment if we get a noun or a verb incorrect? It seems a little bit unfair. It seems like there is some communist-style governing going on that's being forced onto us Australian citizens against our own core values. We have to remind ourselves that we elect them in place. I don't believe they're acting in our best interests. I think we need to be paying more attention of the next federal election up in 2028 and choose our political parties wisely, because these hate speech laws, that they can lock you up in prison for 10 years because of all these protected groups they have in this 500-page document that you have to automatically be able to recall at any given point in time for any conversation that you're ever going to have. Wouldn't it make more sense to be like every other democracy? Every other democracy has freedom of speech enshrined in the Constitution to protect people's lives. Why are we the only democracy that doesn't protect human rights of freedom of speech? But anyway, so in this video, the senator is going to be questioning why there are 7 different ways that these hate speech laws are actually going to assess people's behaviour, whether their behaviour occurs in Victoria or Queensland, and how that's actually going to be assessed whenever they cross borders and behave differently. But they can't even answer these basic questions. So have a look, have a read, take it on board, read through the 500-page document if you've got that sort of time, and let's keep an eye out on this thing, as well as the different political parties that want to enshrine your freedom of speech into the Constitution, so we don't have to bother with this nonsense anymore. Because we're just wasting so much time arguing about absolute nonsense when we can put freedom of speech in the Constitution. We can have academic freedom. We can have everyone being able to say what they are thinking, like all other democracies. But anyway, let's have a listen and tell us what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. So basically, while we're watching, I'm just going to be pausing it from time to time, interjecting with my thoughts for a bit of a critique. And let's take it from there, because we have to keep in mind that all of these new hate speech laws apparently attach to our citizenship wherever we go. So anything that we voice online, including this video, that could be misconstrued in any way, shape or form, can actually be held against you from other foreign countries, against you as a citizen, because it's taking place in the country where they are. And they can hold you responsible for on your Australian soil because it's a crime against the Commonwealth. I personally think it's unfair, and that's why freedom of speech and freedom of no censorship should be placed in the Constitution to protect everyone's interests. If you have something to say it without going to prison. Now, that doesn't replace threatening behaviour, and that doesn't replace incitement to violence and all that sort of stuff, because that's already placed in our legal system. You can't even do that in America, but you definitely can't do that here in Australia. But all we're asking for really is our freedom of speech to be returned back to us, because now it has definitely been taken from us. And look how insane this stuff is.
Given the very real sense of being targeted that much of the Muslim community in Australia has felt, how is it you gave them such cursory engagement? You didn't even give them a copy of the draft provisions, and you basically gave them a 24-hour heads up. Could I ask some questions about the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill, there is very real concern in the community about the extent and the reach of this bill. One provision that was added to the bill, it appears in haste in the last few days of negotiations between the government and the opposition, was 114A(3), which included in the definition of hate crime a series of offences under state and territory laws. And I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different state and territory offences which were roped in. Are you aware of that provision?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Jekin, I don't think the microphone's picking up your answers.
Yes.
Yep. And that wasn't included in the original draft, was it? It was added in at some point in the parliamentary week. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right.
So pretty much since they've first released the 500-page bill and they've condensed it to the 150-page memorandum, they've started adding in more clauses per state, which are also going to affect us citizens, especially if you're going to be travelling interstate from time to time and you think you understand 500 pages. They've added in all these other amendments that are also going to affect you. So apparently there's 7 different tests that you have to be familiar with. Let's keep listening.
All right. Now, I won't read each and every one of the state and territory offences that were roped in, but one of them, for example, is the Victorian Crimes Act provision 195N, which says that if you're in Victoria and you engage in conduct that includes serious contempt towards another person based on one of their protected attributes, that can be a criminal offence in Victoria. Are you aware of that one, Ms. Gigi?
Yes.
All right. So if you live outside of Victoria, is your conduct now governed in part by that provision by reason of 114A(3)? Does the Act apply that test now across the Commonwealth? Is that how it works?
So again, we would avoid giving legal advice to the committee, but can say that that it's conduct within the scope of the particular state offence that is captured by that provision, obviously, and then it's about the AFP minister being satisfied that that's the case.
But that's not what he asked. If in Victoria someone is guilty of contempt against someone in the state of Victoria, because that's a state provision but it's under a Commonwealth law, does that mean that one test would then apply to someone in another state, even though that other person is not in Victoria? And she can't answer it.
But people are asking, not unreasonably, there are now 7 different state and territory offences which previously applied to distinct jurisdictions. They're not unreasonable. People in New South Wales are asking now, is their conduct going to be governed by laws that previously only applied in Victoria? Are those provisions now governing their conduct in New South Wales? And they're asking the same about the Queensland provision, the 2 provisions in WA, the South Australian provision and the ACT provision. Does the bill have the effect of effectively applying those tests, multiple tests in each jurisdiction now?
So to take you to the wording of subsection 2 that defines hate crime as conduct that involves publicly inciting hatred of another person because of race, national, ethnic origin, and would constitute an offence against a provision of a law of a state as set out in that. So it has to be conduct that would constitute one of those offences within the terms of those offences.
Well, because of the territorial application of state and territory laws, there are 2 ways of reading that. If it would only constitute an offence if you did it in Victoria, because that's the extent of the reach of that Victorian provision under the Crimes Act. Or it could be conduct that if you did it in New South Wales, the conduct, whether or not it was in New South Wales or Victoria, but the conduct is such that would breach the law in Victoria, therefore you're also caught.
So we can't give advice on the terms, what conduct would specifically be within the terms of each of the state and territory offences, but it would apply according to the terms of those offences, some of which would capture conduct with an effect in that jurisdiction.
So if you're in the Northern Territory, which doesn't have any of these criminal offences, I think, will conduct in the Northern Territory be tested or potentially tested under the statutory offences that have been listed in 114A3 sub 3? Well, does it extend to conduct happening in the Northern Territory?
Well, it would go according to the terms of those offences. So New South Wales, for example, can capture conduct with an effect in that state, even if the conduct doesn't occur within the state.
But I mean, that's already, so...
Listen to what they just said. If there's misconduct in New South Wales, it doesn't have to be done in New South Wales to capture that. So does that mean they have their own provisions, their own state laws that occur within New South Wales? But if I'm in Queensland, and Queensland doesn't have those laws, like she just said, New South Wales laws can capture you in a different state. It doesn't have to occur in that state because all of these different territories and states have their own law system to facilitate these hate speech laws, but they're essentially part of the one Commonwealth legislation which covers the whole country. So are we only bound as Queensland residents to Queensland and the state that we go to, or are we bound by all 7 different types of tests for these hate speech laws without even knowing about it? So, and they can't even sort of tell us about this stuff.
So if, for example, the Victorian offence, right? The Victorian offence has an exclusion in it, basically excluding conduct engaged in outside of Victoria. Does that mean that under this Commonwealth law, there's different tests, different gateways about whether or not you committed the same conduct in Victoria or New South Wales? Is that what the effect of it? So if you're not caught under the terms of the Act and the territorial application of the State and Territory Acts, then it's not roped in. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that provision sets out that it's conduct that constitutes an offence against the provision of a law of a state or a territory as set out in subsection 3.
So that means if that's the case, that means under this law, there are 7 different Commonwealth tests for conduct that could see you breaching this law and having your conduct, having an organisation banned, because there's a different test in Victoria which has a test of serious contempt than there is in New South Wales, than there is in the Northern Territory. So that's the effect of it, is that there are 7 different alternate gateways, depending where you live though. Is that the effect of it?
No, because as I've said, that's not, taking the New South Wales provision as an example, it could capture conduct outside New South Wales with an effect in New South Wales.
Yeah, so
it doesn't matter where you live. You can live in Victoria and you can get caught up with the hate speech laws that have been developed in Northern Territory because they capture all of it because they all come under the Commonwealth legislation as a crime against the Commonwealth in 7 different tests. So unless you're familiar with all of the hate speech laws in South Australia and you're in Northern Queensland or somewhere, the very end of the country, or you're in Western Australia and you've got to be familiar with Eastern Australia, New South Wales, or Southern Queensland or whatever, you could be undertaking crimes against the Commonwealth without you even knowing it. That's quite harsh on the Australian citizens. Wouldn't it be easier just have freedom of speech, no censorship, like every other democracy in this world, and just live as an open and free person in an open and free democracy. Like, we as tax funders should not be funding this sort of stuff. This is just hyper stupidity to control the masses, control your ability to speak, control your conscience, control your thought system, which is just toxic. Like, this is just nonsense. Like, how many people have been living in the living memory in this country for the last, say, 100 years, 80 years, 50 years, 40 years, 20 years? Never in our living memory have we come across such toxic communist-style governing where they are literally going to lock you up in prison in 7 different ways if you get the wrong noun, your wrong verb right. Surely there are some better political parties than some of these hate speech laws that have been forced upon us against our will. We didn't elect this. This sort of communist-style approach is not something that the people want. Like, this is absolute nonsense. This is just locking people up in prison. But let's keep going.
But if you did the conduct in New South Wales, well, let's take the Victorian one. If you did this serious conduct that meets the serious contempt threshold in Victoria and it impacts in Victoria, then it's covered by the Victorian Act. If you did it in New South Wales and you were targeting people in Victoria, then it might cover the Victorian Act. But if you did it in Queensland, targeting people in Queensland, it doesn't meet the test. That's the effect of your answers, Ms. Gigi.
Well, I don't have all of the state provisions in front of me, but obviously they certainly overlap for conduct.
Are there other examples that you can point to where the Commonwealth has passed a law which is putting 7 different thresholds, 7 different legal tests for breaches of a Commonwealth Act dependent upon which state or territory you live in? Can you point to other examples where you've done this?
Senator, the other thing I would take you to is this is just one aspect of all the considerations that apply as part of the listing process.
Well, we may get to them. I'm asking you about this one, though. I'm asking you about this one. Can you point to another example where the Commonwealth has provided for, in this case, fairly extreme powers to ban and criminalise organisations, to criminalise membership of organisations, where there is a different test, 7 different tests being applied in the 7 different state and territory jurisdictions across the country? Can you point to another example where the Commonwealth's done this?
I'm going to indicate I'm going to rotate the call after your response to this question.
We'd need to take that on notice.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge.
Can I go back?
So they're going to take that on notice. They can't answer basic questions about how us Australian citizens are going to be trialled for trivial psychological harm of a whole list of protected groups and attributes. The attributes, there's an endless list. So there's not any clear one short list of how you may attribute a certain protected group in the 500 pages. But these people who are inventing these legislations, they can't even explain it of how people are actually going to be trialed or charged or be guilty of it. So how are we supposed to know if we have to watch this stuff, the circus in Canberra, and they can't even tell us what they've drafted and how it's going to apply across every situation that we're going to be guilty in? Freedom of speech, no censorship. Let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to true Australian values where say what you need to, and you know what people are thinking, but be responsible for your actions. This country has always been in living memory over the last at least 60, 70 years. You will always be responsible for your actions. Say what you want. People say things when they're heated, annoyed, angry, upset, etc. But you pick something up and you go rob a bank, or you intentionally, act as a predator or something like that, or you go rob a bank, you're held responsible, you're put in prison, see you later. All this nonsense about, you said this and you said that and you could have meant this and you could have meant that and no one can explain it. By the way, carries a 10-year prison sentence. Come on, that's not Australia. That's not Australian values. That's communism values. Us Australians, we should not be putting up with this. We should be voting for the correct political party over the upcoming federal election, hopefully in 2028. But I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.